where you're going to lose time, where you're going to gain time. All these things you run through your head. Like,
yeah, I would love reconciliation.
The invitation arrived without celebration, hidden inside a private message that carried more fear than warmth. After years of public conflict and private silence, Meghan had finally been offered a place inside the royal circle again, but someone within the palace was already determined she would never reach the ceremony. There was no personal call, no warm family note, and no open acknowledgement that the invitation represented something extraordinary. It came quietly, through carefully controlled channels, as though even sending it had required permission from people who did not want their names attached to the decision. The ceremony carried deep emotional importance for the royal family, and Meghan's inclusion could not be dismissed as a simple act of courtesy. Her presence would send a message far beyond the palace walls. It would suggest that, despite the bitterness, accusations, and years of distance, the monarchy was prepared to recognize her again. But recognition was not forgiveness. Harry understood that immediately. He had spent too long watching palace language hide palace intentions. To the public, Meghan's return might look like reconciliation. Behind closed doors, it could become another test of obedience. She would be stepping back into the institution they believed had isolated her, controlled her voice, and turned private pain into public pressure. Harry feared that one photograph, one carefully arranged greeting, could be used to claim that every wound had healed. Meghan faced a different struggle. Refusing the invitation might protect her, but it would also give the palace the power to explain her absence. She could be called afraid, bitter, or unwilling to make peace. Accepting meant entering a place she no longer trusted. Declining meant allowing others to write the story for her. Then she read the instructions. Her arrival time was separated from Harry's. A private entrance had been assigned. Her seat was described without naming who would be beside her. Contact with senior royals would depend on ceremonial requirements, and the document avoided confirming whether she could appear publicly with her husband. These were not small details. They were warnings hidden inside protocol. Some palace advisors reportedly supported her attendance because the monarchy needed a softer image. Others believed Meghan's return would weaken their control and reopen questions they had worked hard to bury. The invitation had been approved, but not unanimously. Inside the palace, no one seemed able to agree on what Meghan now represented: a guest, a relative, or a danger. She accepted quietly, but demanded written confirmation that her position would not be altered at the last moment. It was not a request born from pride. It was born from experience. Hours later, Harry's team learned that another ceremony plan was already circulating. The arrivals were different, the seating had changed, and Meghan's name was nowhere on the page. As Harry demanded to know why two versions of the same royal plan existed, the palace stopped discussing Meghan's arrival and began arguing over what her presence might expose. Meghan believed she had been invited to witness a ceremony, but the palace understood something far more dangerous. Her attendance would place her beside the people deciding the future of royal power, inheritance, and loyalty. What appeared to be reconciliation was secretly becoming a battle over who controlled the monarchy's next chapter. This was not an ordinary family gathering. The ceremony carried the weight of continuity, duty, and allegiance. It was designed to remind everyone inside the royal circle that the monarchy survived through order, obedience, and carefully managed succession. Every position mattered. Every greeting carried meaning. Even silence could become a declaration. That was why Meghan's place could not be treated as a minor detail. If she entered beside Harry, sat near senior members of the family, or received a formal welcome, the palace would be acknowledging something it had spent years trying to leave uncertain: that she still held a place within the royal structure. The discussion soon moved beyond Meghan. Behind closed doors, officials began debating whether Harry and Meghan's children should be mentioned or symbolically represented during the proceedings. Some argued that excluding them would look cruel. Others warned that acknowledging them could strengthen future claims involving titles, ceremonial rights, family status, and inheritance traditions. A single reference could reopen questions the palace preferred to keep buried. One group of advisors wanted Meghan there because reconciliation would improve the monarchy's image. They imagined headlines about healing, maturity, and family unity. But the traditionalists saw something else. To them, her return would not represent peace. It would reward defiance. Harry became increasingly convinced that the invitation was a test. Meghan was expected to appear grateful, follow every instruction, and leave without challenging the version of events prepared for the public. No private conversations with certain relatives, no mention of old grievances, no independent media contact, no movement outside the approved schedule. She could attend, but only if she surrendered control over what her attendance meant. For Meghan, the realization was painful. The palace seemed willing to display reconciliation without confronting the reasons the family had broken apart. They wanted the photograph, not the truth. Her presence could be celebrated publicly while her voice remained restricted privately. Then, Harry learned of a sealed briefing circulated among senior royal households. It warned that Meghan's attendance could create unmanageable consequences if certain family matters were discussed. The language was deliberately vague, but the fear behind it was unmistakable. More disturbing was the source of the strongest resistance. It had not come from the senior royal, Harry suspected. The pressure was being driven by someone who had remained publicly quiet for years while privately carrying resentment that had never disappeared. The closer the ceremony came, the less the invitation resembled an olive branch, and when Meghan's name was quietly moved on the final seating plan, Harry understood that the real confrontation had already begun. Just after midnight, an amended protocol document reached Harry's team. Meghan had not yet entered the palace, but her role had already been reduced, her movements restricted, and her place beside her husband quietly removed. The invitation remained intact, yet everything it had promised was being stripped away line by line. The most damaging change appeared in the seating plan. Meghan had been moved from a visible family position to a distant place normally reserved for secondary guests, unofficial companions, and people the palace wished to acknowledge without truly including. The message was impossible to miss. She could enter the building, but she would not be allowed to look as though she belonged there. Then came the separation from Harry. For part of the ceremony, he was expected to enter with members of the royal family, while Meghan followed later under the supervision of an unfamiliar palace official. Harry saw the arrangement for what it was, an attempt to isolate his wife in public while preserving the convenient claim that she had been welcomed. The explanation arrived in familiar language: security, hierarchy, ceremonial balance. Each phrase sounded official, but together they concealed a coordinated insult. The private family gatherings scheduled before the ceremony had also disappeared from Meghan's arrangements. No warning had been given. No reason was offered. Meghan did not react with the anger some officials may have expected. Instead, she asked two direct questions. Who had authorized the changes? And were the same restrictions being placed on every other non-working royal? No one answered. Responsibility moved from one household to another. Secretaries blamed security. Security referred the matter back to ceremonial advisors. Advisors claimed they were following instructions from senior offices that refused to identify themselves. The confusion felt deliberate, a wall built from titles, procedures, and denials. Then, Harry's team noticed something that changed the entire meaning of the revisions. The amended pages carried preparation details showing they had been drafted days earlier. This was not a sudden response to new information. It was a concealed plan, held back until Meghan had almost no time to object. The timing was the trap. If she protested, she could be described as disruptive. If she withdrew, The palace could say she had rejected reconciliation. Harry was torn between taking Meghan away from another humiliation and refusing to hand the institution an excuse to blame them. His frustration deepened when a senior royal privately urged him to accept the changes for the sake of the crown. The words reopened an old wound. Duty had been used before to demand his silence, even when silence came at a painful personal cost. Meghan finally made her decision. She would still attend, but only if the original written terms were honored exactly as promised. That decision forced the palace into a corner, because honoring the invitation would expose who had tried to weaken it, while canceling it would confirm that reconciliation had never been the true purpose. With Meghan dressed, security prepared, and the ceremony only hours away, the final message arrived. Her invitation had been withdrawn. There was no apology, no family call, and no clear explanation, only a cold palace notice claiming circumstances had changed. But behind that sentence, panic was already spreading through the royal households. Everything had already been arranged. Travel details had been confirmed. Security teams had coordinated movements. Clothing, timing, entrances, and private transport had all been approved. Meghan had followed every instruction she had been given, even as those instructions became colder and more restrictive. Then, with almost no time left, the palace removed her completely. The cancellation notice was painfully formal. It referred to revised ceremonial requirements and the need to protect the dignity of the occasion. It did not explain what had changed. It did not name the person responsible. Most revealing of all, it was sent to staff rather than delivered by a member of Harry's family. Harry's anger was immediate. This was not only an insult to Meghan, it was an act of calculated distance. The palace wanted the decision enforced without anyone personally accepting responsibility for it. Minutes later, Harry received a private call urging him to attend alone. That request destroyed the official explanation. The ceremony had not been cancelled. There was no security emergency. The occasion itself remained unchanged. Only Meghan had been removed. She did not break down or lash out. Her response was controlled, but the betrayal cut deeply. The invitation had offered the possibility of recognition, only to become a final demand for submission. Meghan asked one question that no one seemed willing to answer. Had she been excluded because she refused the altered conditions? Or had the palace always planned to cancel her place once Harry's attendance was secured? Then an internal note began circulating. It warned of the risk of an uncontrolled encounter between Meghan and a senior royal before the ceremony. The words suggested that palace officials were not afraid of disruption. They were afraid of a conversation they could not supervise. A further twist deepened the confusion. Not every senior family member had supported the cancellation. At least one royal had still been told that Meghan was attending, while other households learned of her removal only after the message had been sent. Suddenly, no one could clearly explain who possessed the authority to exclude her. Harry refused to go alone. He warned that the palace could not invite his wife publicly, humiliate her privately, and then use his presence as evidence of family unity. Behind closed doors, officials began debating whether to announce that Meghan had made a personal decision to withdraw. The strategy was obvious: remove her, then make her carry the blame. Harry responded by ordering his team to preserve every message, every revision, and every version of the invitation. What had begun as a private humiliation was becoming a written record. The cancellation was meant to remove Meghan quietly. But Harry's refusal to cooperate transformed it into something the palace feared far more: a crisis that could no longer be contained within one household. Within minutes of Harry's refusal, the palace fractured. Advisors shouted across secure telephone lines, competing statements were drafted, and senior royals demanded to know who had authorized the cancellation. Meghan had been removed from the ceremony, but the decision now threatened to expose a far deeper struggle over power inside the monarchy. Harry's position was formal and absolute. He would not attend unless Meghan's invitation was restored and the original terms were honored. There would be no separate arrival, no reduced status, and no appearance designed to suggest unity while his wife was being punished behind closed doors. That declaration created immediate panic. Organizers had believed Meghan's absence could be managed with a vague explanation. Harry's absence was different. His empty place would be noticed. It would raise questions the palace could not answer without revealing the conflict it had tried to hide. One faction demanded that the invitation be restored before the situation became public. Another argued that reversing the decision would make the crown look weak, as though pressure from Harry had forced the monarchy to retreat. What had begun as a disagreement over one guest was now a fight over royal authority. Confusion spread because different households had been given different stories. Some senior royals were told Meghan had refused to follow protocol. Others heard that security officials had raised concerns. A third group was informed that her invitation had never been fully confirmed. The explanations could not all be true. Then another detail emerged. The communications team had already prepared language suggesting Meghan had withdrawn voluntarily. The statement had been drafted before Harry completed his protest, raising a chilling possibility. The palace had expected this outcome. Meghan refused to let that false version stand. She did not demand revenge or an immediate public attack. She asked for something simpler and more dangerous. Harry must not repeat the palace's explanation. Silence was one thing. Helping to rewrite the truth was another. The argument soon became personal. A senior royal confronted Harry privately and accused him of placing his marriage above the monarchy. Harry's reply cut directly through years of resentment. The crown had demanded loyalty from him again and again, he said, while offering Meghan none when she needed protection most. For once, someone inside the family challenged the cancellation. A respected royal warned that humiliating Meghan would deepen the division the ceremony was supposed to conceal. But officials were already looking beyond the family dispute. They feared the written evidence, the confirmed invitation, altered plans, and contradictory messages could be described or released. Arrival times were delayed, guests were repositioned. Parts of the ceremony were shortened to reduce the risk that Harry's absence would dominate the occasion. Finally, the palace offered a compromise. Meghan could attend, but only through a private entrance. She would not join the family procession, she would not receive a formal acknowledgement. Her presence would be omitted from the official record. The offer appeared to restore Meghan's place, yet its hidden terms were more humiliating than the cancellation itself, and accepting them would mean surrendering to a rule the palace had never dared to write down. The palace's final offer exposed the real condition behind Meghan's invitation. She could enter the ceremony, but she could not be seen as equal, welcomed, or fully royal. The restriction was never written into public protocol. It belonged to an older, harsher tradition, one designed to protect the crown by erasing those who challenged it. Under the revised arrangement, Meghan would enter only as Harry's private companion. She would not be received as a recognized member of the royal family, and the distinction was deliberate. She could be inside the building, close enough to witness the ceremony, yet officially separated from everything that gave the occasion meaning. There would be no place for her in the formal arrival, no position in the family procession, no public greeting from senior royals. Her name would not appear in the commemorative record, and any official account of the day could simply pass over her presence. The palace was not offering inclusion, it was offering invisibility. For generations, royal institutions had known how to manage relatives who became inconvenient. They were tolerated in private, excluded in public, and slowly removed from the official story until their absence seemed natural. Meghan now understood that the argument had never truly been about security or ceremonial balance. It was about controlling what her return would symbolize. Harry felt the cruelty of that demand more deeply than anyone. To remain connected to his family, he was being asked to participate in the erasure of his own wife. He could attend beside her, but only if he accepted that the monarchy would treat her as someone who did not fully exist. The consequences reached beyond one ceremony. A visible welcome could influence future questions involving titles, ceremonial rites, family recognition, and the position of Harry and Meghan's children. Traditionalists feared that one public act of reconciliation might create expectations that the Sussex family could someday reclaim a place within royal life. That was precisely why Meghan refused the private entrance. Accepting it would allow the palace to present itself as generous while hiding her like a problem. It would turn humiliation into compromise and exclusion into kindness. A senior advisor warned Harry that refusal could permanently close the door to future invitations. But Harry heard more than a warning. He heard an admission. The palace was prepared to sacrifice family contact rather than surrender control over appearances. Meghan made her choice. She would not attend under conditions designed to make her disappear, but neither would she allow the palace to claim she had walked away without cause. Meghan's decision ended the argument over attendance, but it opened a more dangerous battle over the official story, and someone inside the palace was already preparing to betray the version agreed behind closed doors. As the ceremony began without Meghan and Harry, a confidential document surfaced among palace staff. It contained the timeline of the cancellation, the names of those consulted, and one devastating fact: the decision had been authorized before Meghan challenged the seating plan. Her humiliation had not been a reaction. It had been the strategy. The document showed that discussions about removing Meghan had started long before the final protocol dispute. Her objections had not caused the crisis. They had merely interrupted a plan already moving through private offices, protected by vague instructions and carefully divided responsibility. The original invitation, it appeared, had served two purposes. It created the appearance of reconciliation, but it also increased the chance that Harry would attend. Once travel was arranged and withdrawal became difficult, Meghan's position could be reduced. The palace expected one of two outcomes: she would accept the humiliation in silence, or she would refuse and carry the blame for another family rupture. The authorization led back to a powerful household authority committed to preserving the existing hierarchy. The decision was not described as personal revenge. That made it colder. Meghan had been treated as a threat to the structure itself, someone whose acknowledgement could weaken years of carefully managed distance. Several relatives had been kept deliberately uninformed. Advisors feared that early objections could delay or reverse the cancellation, so the decision was allowed to become almost irreversible before the wider family understood what was happening. The document also explained the warning about an uncontrolled encounter. Officials feared Meghan might privately meet a royal who had shown sympathy toward her, challenged the palace's account of the conflict, or raised questions about the future status of Harry's children. A conversation without witnesses could create promises, alliances, or admissions the institution could not control. Harry realized that private efforts at reconciliation had not simply failed. They had been monitored. Access had been limited, conversations redirected, and emotional contact treated as a political danger. For Meghan, that was the deepest betrayal. The palace had not merely rejected her. It had used the language of peace to draw her toward a controlled defeat, allowing hope to become part of the trap. Yet one official had objected in writing. The warning was clear. If the true timeline became public, the strategy could follow the monarchy for years. As the ceremony continued, Harry's empty place carried its own accusation. Communications staff began rewriting their explanation, aware that the document contradicted any claim that Meghan had withdrawn freely. Now Harry faced the choice the palace had always feared. He could expose the plan and deepen the war, or remain silent and watch the institution transform deception into history. Harry had spent years accusing the institution of protecting itself through silence, but now the evidence was in his hands, and whatever he chose would determine whether this became another buried wound or the beginning of an irreversible royal reckoning. The ceremony proceeded beneath polished tradition, but two empty places carried more power than the crowns: uniforms and ancient words surrounding them. Meghan had been excluded, Harry had refused to submit, and the palace had preserved the event only to expose how much it was willing to destroy to protect appearances. Officials carried on as though nothing had happened. The order remained formal. The language remained calm. Yet beneath that control, guests were quietly asking the same question: where were Harry and Meghan? Their absence could not be hidden by altered seating or shortened proceedings. It had become the strongest message of the day. The palace issued a carefully written statement suggesting that attendance arrangements had been reached by mutual agreement. But the wording was too polished and too vague. It explained nothing. Reports of last-minute changes, contradictory briefings, and Harry's refusal to attend alone immediately weakened the official story. Harry did not release the private correspondence. Not yet. He understood that exposing every message in anger could deepen the damage beyond repair. Instead, he corrected one crucial claim. Meghan had not simply withdrawn without explanation. She had been invited, restricted, cancelled, and then offered a place that required her to disappear. For Meghan, even that correction could not erase the deeper injury. For a brief moment, she had believed the invitation might represent genuine change. She had allowed herself to consider that the family could recognize the pain without demanding silence in return. The cancellation destroyed more than an arrangement. It destroyed the possibility she had almost trusted. Harry saw the decision as confirmation of an old and painful truth. Inside the monarchy, love could exist only until it challenged loyalty to the institution. When the crown felt threatened, family bonds became negotiable. The ceremony ended, but the conflict did not. Senior households blamed one another for the failed strategy. Officials denied responsibility. Private trust weakened. One royal later contacted Harry and admitted that the cancellation had gone too far, yet refused to challenge the decision publicly. Sympathy remained hidden. Silence remained official. That contradiction revealed the monarchy's wider struggle. Every attempt to control its image created fresh proof of the conflict beneath it. Meghan's exclusion also raised questions that would not disappear: the future recognition of her children, their ceremonial position, inheritance traditions, and whether someone could remain part of the family while being erased from its public life. The final reversal was impossible to ignore. Meghan had been cancelled to prevent her presence from overshadowing the ceremony. Instead, her absence became the only detail people remembered. The documents still existed. Alliances had fractured. And Harry still held the complete timeline. The palace believed it had defended royal dignity by closing one door. But the sound of that door shutting traveled far beyond the ceremony and awakened conflicts the monarchy could no longer pretend were private. The ceremony ended, the guests departed, and the official record was carefully preserved, but inside the palace, everyone understood that the real story had only just begun.